Yeah,
I'll
anyone
kick
want
us
to
off.
share?
I'm Amanda. I have a very small garden. I'm new and I have a fenced in yard, but I still have a lot of critters. A lot of them hide in my backyard because it's the safe zone from the neighborhood because I have the fence. So I'm kind of navigating, certain plants and what's going to happen this year with other creatures eating my harvest.
Mhm. We have major deer issues in Decorah here. Like every fence needs to be 6 feet tall or they're going to eat everything in your garden. So my name is Kathryn. I work at Seed Savers Exchange. I'm the exchange and outreach coordinator. So I do presentations and events like this, help plan events on the farm here, virtual experiences. We've been doing a lot more virtual these last, I guess, year and a half. Um, and then I coordinate the exchange, which is an international gardener to gardener seed sharing program that we have facilitated. Was our very first program of Seed Savers Exchange in 1975. So that's a place for home gardeners to share plants and seeds, tubers or bulbs or anything that's important to them that they would like to share with other people, they're able to share through the exchange. Um, I've been at Seed Savers for about 3 years now and have always gardened pretty much. My family farmed, and so a garden was a big piece of my life growing up. We did a lot of canning, things like that, and at the time wasn't something I particularly enjoyed. But as I grew older, I realized, how much community you can create around gardening. Um, you have to work together to put in the garden, to harvest. You get to share the food. The process of canning it, was something that took every generation in my family, grandparents, parents, siblings. So anywhere that I move, I always need to find a way to put in a garden and so that I can continue that tradition. All right, let me share my screen here. All right, so the topic of this presentation is preserving seeds. We're a seed bank, um, but also there's stories. The stories have always been just as important as the seeds themselves. And so, how do we do that too? This is a picture of our kind of main display garden and our visitor center here in Decorah, Iowa. If you're ever trekking across the country, feel free to visit. It's pretty amazing. We do have folks stop by from, you know, within a 1 or a 3 hour radius is very common to have people visiting from that distance, but we also get people visiting from even further than that. So folks are always welcome to come visit. All right, our mission at Seed Savers Exchange is to steward America's culturally diverse and endangered garden and food crop legacy for present and future generations. We educate and connect people through collecting, regenerating, and sharing heirloom seeds, plants, and stories. So, our most public program is the seed catalog. So we have about 600 varieties that we share through the catalog every year. And it's kind of a mix of things from the seed bank that you maybe can't find anywhere else because they've been donated directly to us by a family. Um, we also have some kind of garden favorites, and the catalog is accessible online at seedsavers.org. You can request to get a really beautiful print catalog in the mail. And then this picture is a seed rack program. So we have garden centers all over the country that have reached out to us and are carrying their seeds in our stores as well. So I should have looked beforehand, but I could check at the end to see if we have any places in Connecticut that are carrying our seeds. So we are in Decorah, Iowa. It's in what's known as the driftless area. So the glaciers that flattened most of the plains when they were receding actually missed the driftless area. And so you can see we have bluffs and kind of cliffs and a lot of hills. So it doesn't really look anything like the rest of Iowa. It's right up in the northeast corner of Iowa. And then the bottom right-hand picture is originally this was a Norwegian settlement. And I like to think that they settled here because Decorah kind of has some of the look of like the Norwegian fjords. Before it was a Norwegian settlement, it was home to the Meskwaki people. The name Decorah and Winnesheek are actually Ho-Chunk names. The Ho-Chunk were moved to this area by the United States government to kind of create a little bit of a buffer between the Meskwaki Nation and the Sioux, I believe, who were kind of fighting as their land was shrinking. So the government moved the Ho-Chunk here. They were here for only about 50 years, and then the government moved them again. So there's a history of a lot of movements of different people in this area. So we started just as an informal seed swap. This picture is Kent Otwaley and Diane Otwaley and 2 of their kids. They would have 5 kids. And so they started just with an informal exchange, wanting to kind of continue with their regular jobs, but also wanted to help people find a way to share seeds that were important to them. So they started a seed swap. And all it was people would send them in the mail a list of the seeds that they had and wanted to share with other people and their contact information. So it was only supposed to be a list of the seeds they wanted to share. And then the membership that first year was a quarter. And then they would put all those listings together into a publication and then mail it back to everybody that wanted to participate. And then those folks would reach out to each other via mail and request seeds. But in that very first year, there were folks who decided to also send Kent and Diane their physical seeds in the mail and would say, can you hold on to these seeds? They're really important to us, and we want to be sure that somebody that's knowledgeable about seed saving can preserve these for the long term. And so that upper right-hand picture is essentially the beginning of the seed collection. And you can see it's just a lot of different envelopes that came in the mail, starting to do a little bit of organization in some glass containers. But they, decided, wow, people are sending us their seeds and their stories. They're important, and we should try and save them. So the collection since then has grown to over 20,000 varieties of mostly seeds, mostly vegetables, but we also have a garlic collection, an apple orchard. We have flowers and herbs and grains. So just about anything you can think of, we probably have at least one variety within the collection. So a couple kind of key words to pull out of that mission statement are steward. So this is the inside of that seed bank. Lots of little tiny packets on shelves. The freezer is kept at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -18 Celsius. And it's estimated that seeds under those conditions can last up to 100 years. We do germination testing on those seeds to make sure that the viability is staying at the levels that we like it. But we only do germination testing on varieties once every 10 years. And typically the seeds are fine and we'll package them back up and they can go back in the vault. And if there's been any decrease in the germination, then we'll grow it again so that we can have fresh seed supply. So I mentioned that we also have garlic. You can't take garlic cloves and put them in a freezer for 100 years. So our garlic collection is about 280 different varieties, and we have to grow that entire collection every single year on the farm in order to maintain it. And then we also steward the stories. So this is Grandpa Miller's potato, and it's actually named after the little girl that's seated. So the baby named after her grandfather, who was Grandfather Miller. It was her grandchildren that donated the potato to Seed Savers Exchange. And she always called it Grandpa Miller after her grandfather. So that's what we decided to call it. And you can see that they're really large, kind of russet tuber. Let's see, so Steward, we also educate. We have a lot of resources online, some seed saving guides and gardening guides on our website. We have in-person workshops, virtual workshops. We're always putting out content on YouTube. And then the Seed Garden is a print book that might even be in your library, who knows? We published the Seed Garden a couple years ago, and then about 15 years ago, we worked with Suzanne Ashworth on Seed to Seed, which is another well-known seed saving guide. So we're here to educate people. The more people we have gardening, saving seed, sharing seed, the more resilient our garden supply is going to be. And then last, we're also here to help people connect. So on the left-hand side of this screen, we have the homepage of the exchange. This is the seed sharing platform that I facilitate. You can go on here and you'll also be able to find about 20,000 varieties being shared from the Seed Savers Exchange collection, but also home gardeners collecting and sharing their own seeds. So the website is updated in real time. We also do publish an annual print edition of the exchange called the yearbook. So if you're somebody who really likes flipping through pages instead of looking at a screen online, the yearbook is available to members of Seed Savers Exchange, and then we have it available to purchase on our website as well. It looks a lot different than our catalog, which is, has about 600 varieties and is really beautiful, lots of colors and pictures. The exchange is very different. It's 500 pages, black and white, because we have to fit 20,000 varieties in there. But it's definitely something that to kind of pour over and fills up some of those long winter nights you can spend dreaming about your next garden. And then the other picture I have here is citizen science. So these are ways for home gardeners to get involved in some of our programs. So this picture, can anyone tell what plant is being grown in this picture? I love this one because I grow this crop every year. I haven't planted this year, but I've never had it look like this. Does anyone have any guesses? I see some folks are like peering, trying to get a good look at the picture. So this is Renew, which is a program where home gardeners, farmers. We have some nonprofit organizations that receive seeds from us to regenerate. What that means is you're growing the variety in isolation from anything that it might cross with, harvesting those seeds and sharing them back with Seed Savers Exchange so that we can preserve them within our seed collection. So this is a variety of okra. And this individual is in a southern climate. This variety probably would not have reached seed maturity in Decorah because it is so tall and so lush, and okra really loves heat. So if we grew it here, it probably would have been much smaller, but Citizen Science Corps allows us to kind of reach out to folks in different growing regions, and so we can see how crops do across the country. So Renew is one program which requires being able to save seed and send it back to us. We also have a citizen science program at the same website or web link called Adapt, which is receiving a few varieties from us that you grow and then just take notes on. You can take notes on its performance in your climate and how it tasted, and then share those results back with us so that we have a better idea of how the variety does in different regions and how popular it is for eating. So those are two opportunities to connect with us as well. And then the third connection opportunity I have is the Community Seed Network. So this is a place for folks that want to be involved in a little bit larger kind of community seed initiatives. So that includes seed libraries, educating about gardening or seed saving. You can see that there's a map here. These are all individual gardeners or organizations that are involved in gardening or seed saving work. So it's a place where you can reach out. You can visit the site to see maybe what's in your area. So just kind of browse and see what other programs are out there. Are there any other seed libraries in your area, any seed banks? It's also a place for you to connect with people and share ideas or share advice or look for connections that way. And then we do have some educational tools on this site as well. So this is communityseednetwork.org. All right, so we have a lot of ways for folks to participate in our mission who just want to garden, purchase things from our catalog or from the seed bank and grow them, grow flowers for beauty, grow things that you can eat and share with your family. But ultimately, we're a seed saving organization. So my question here for everybody is, why save seeds? As an organization or as an individual? There's some overlap in those rationale for why someplace like Seed Savers Exchange might save seeds, but all of them can kind of also be accomplished by a home gardener on a smaller scale as well. So any ideas? If you want to, feel free to share something in the chat. You can do that. And I'll give us like 10 seconds, even if you don't want to say something. I think it's helpful to pause and you can come up with your own ideas in your brain. And reflect on this a little bit. These pictures are of some kind of allium, so an onion. And if you're going to be harvesting onions for the bulbs, for the actual onion itself, you might never see the onion go to flower. But onions and alliums, I think, have some of the most beautiful flowers of any crop. And so that's one reason off the bat is seed saving can be really beautiful. You get to see a part of the plant that sometimes if you're harvesting it before it reaches seed maturity, you might never actually see what the plant looks like at every stage in its life. So it could be beautiful, it could be educational. So here are some of the reasons I came up with. So seed saving is delicious. You get to try new varieties if you're going to be saving your own seeds. These squash are from my first year at Seed Savers Exchange. We were trialing squash from the catalog, and I just got to take home all these different kinds of squash and cook with them. And the one right in the front that's kind of like shaped like a bell, I believe, is a potty marron. To this day, that's one of my favorite squash. In the back, we have the one that's kind of like blue and like ridged, I think is Queensland Blue, which is a variety from Australia. Right in front of that, there's Winter Luxury, which is a really delectable pie pumpkin. And it has like this, it looks like white lace almost like on the outside of the pumpkin. So the pumpkin's orange, but then it has this white kind of lacy netting. And so it just looks like a luxurious squash as well. And then the middle picture is an attempt at seed saving last year. And so I went to visit some friends in Colombia a couple years ago, and they had a fruit called uchuva, which looks kind of like a ground cherry, but was much, much sweeter, I think. And so I loved it. We can't find uchuva seeds in the United States. So I harvested some fruits and the seeds from them, and then I brought them home and I grew them again. So bringing a little bit of that back to Iowa with me. All right, seed saving is also resilient. So this chart on the right-hand side is actually the order fulfillments that we were having last spring because of the pandemic. So the red line is 2019, what is pretty much an average year of seed purchases that come into the organization. And then you can see like 3.8 in blue, which is 2020, there was a huge spike. So that was folks that wanted to get into gardening. They were trying to take care of themselves and their families, growing a garden. And you could see that after that big spike, then there's a drop. And we had to shut off our website for about 2 weeks because we just couldn't fulfill those seed orders at that level. So folks who wanted to order seeds in that 2 weeks weren't able to because our website was closed. So being able to save your own seeds ensures that you have what you need every year. Hopefully we're not faced with that kind of fluctuation every year, but a more common thing you might experience is seed companies are always changing what they're offering. They introduce new things, they drop old things, and it could be something that you really love that a catalog has offered for years and years, and then one year they don't have it anymore. And that can happen for many, many different reasons. So saving your own seeds is kind of the best way to ensure that you have those seeds for yourself. And then the picture on the left-hand side is a study from 1985. And the top of that chart, you can see that the bars are larger. Those are the number of varieties that were available from seed catalogs in 1903. And then fast forward to 1983, which is the bottom. And you can see those lines are much skinnier. That's how many of those 1903 varieties were still available to the home gardener 80 years later. And so There had been 434 peas in 1903 available to the home gardener. 80 years later, only 25 of those peas could still be found from commercial catalogs. So that's another reason to save seeds. All right, seed saving also connects us to our past. This is a fish pepper, which is a really wonderful, delicious pepper. It's a hot pepper. You can see here that there's kind of a picture of, it's a white chowder. And this pepper had essentially an accidental trait at one point, which made it an albino pepper. So it does turn red at like full seed maturity, but you can see that there's also some peppers that are less mature that are kind of light pale yellow, or maybe have a little bit of variegation. So the way this pepper was used was, it was harvested at that very pale stage, dried, and turned into like a white cayenne pepper. And then that ingredient was added to white chowders or soups. And since the pepper was then white, it didn't add any color to the white chowder. It was traditionally used by African American chefs in the Mid-Atlantic. And so it was kind of like an unwritten secret ingredient that added some heat, but you couldn't actually see it in the final dish. The picture is of a painter named Horace Pippin. And then the other individual is William Moyes Weaver. And where they come into this story, William Moyes Weaver has an interesting kind of introduction into seed saving. When his grandfather passed away, they were cleaning out his home, and within his grandfather's deep freeze, they found all of these packets of seeds that he had collected over his lifetime. And they were just living in his freezer. And William decided to grow them out and see what they were. And it was essentially a time capsule of vegetables and flowers from his grandfather's life. And one of those varieties was this fish pepper. By that time, this pepper had kind of disappeared. It wasn't being utilized anymore. His grandfather originally received it as a gift from Horace Pippin. The two of them were neighbors. And so William Moyes Weaver was able to introduce it to the commercial seed trade again. So a variety that could have been lost if not for individual home gardeners saving those seeds and passing them on. A couple other programs we're doing to kind of reconnect people to seeds, seed rematriation. So this is a picture of squash and seeds that were delivered to the Taos Pueblo in New Mexico. We receive seeds into the collection in a lot of different ways. In some cases, it was collectors, other preservationists will reach out and acquire things from the USDA if we think it should be returned to the general public. So we're actively kind of looking through our collection now and trying to identify varieties that have indigenous origins and reaching out to communities and seeing if they want them back. So this program has expanded to, we're working with 3 different partners last year, the Meskwaki in Iowa, and a couple other organizations in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And this year we're working with 2 more groups. And then the Collard Project. So this is a fun one too. We're working with a couple other seed companies here. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange is based out of Virginia, Working Food in Florida, and the Utopian Seed Project, which I believe is also in Virginia. And I highly encourage everybody to visit heirloomcollards.org. It's such a fascinating story about how all these collards were actually collected by the USDA. It was two folks from the USDA that essentially just traveled gravel roads in the deep South. And if they saw somebody growing collard greens, they would stop and ask if it was a commercial variety or if it was something that their family was stewarding. And they took those collard greens into the USDA collection. And since then, we've acquired about 60 varieties. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange has them as well. And so now we're trying to get people to grow these unique collard varieties. A lot of them are named after the people that donated them, which is kind of fun. You get to feel a little bit of a connection to the original stewards in that way. So definitely look out for this project. And then the last reason I have here, a rationale for seed saving, is it contributes, not only to our past, helping us stay connected to the past, but it's also important for our futures. This Bradford watermelon, this is a historic variety that was supposed to be the sweetest watermelon in the South. Very large watermelons. It was originally from the Bradford family, which was a fairly wealthy family. They were farming large amounts of these Bradford melons, watermelon, and then shipping them throughout the South. But as more kind of commercial vegetable shipping was coming into play, smaller, more compact and sturdier watermelons became more popular for, selling in grocery stores. So the Bradford watermelon kind of disappeared. An individual actually found a 7th generation Bradford family member who still had just a small patch of these watermelons that he was preserving. The individual in this picture is a member of Seed Savers Exchange named Bjorn, who lives in Wisconsin. So very different climate from the deep South where these watermelons originally came from. But he requested some seeds and has been saving them on his property now for going on 5 years. And he says every single year, these watermelons ripen a little bit earlier because they're adapting to his climate. So we have regional adaptations that can happen over time. And that ensures that every year that these varieties are grown, they can adapt to the climate as it is slowly changing. If it's grown in multiple regions, that variety is going to be more resilient because it's being adapted to a couple different places that have different growing conditions. Whereas seeds that are saved in a seed bank, we'll have those varieties for decades. But if we pull a seed out in 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, that seed is kind of being brought into a world or a region or a climate that might be drastically different from where that seed was originally saved and grown. So it's better for these varieties to be grown every single year. And then the second picture we have here is Rosie's Pink Morning Glory. This is from a North Dakota woman who was growing a blue Morning Glory. And this was a sport. A sport is just kind of a random fruit or flower or plant that looks different. So somewhere within the genetic code for this variety, there was like hiding a gene for pink flowers. And it just came out one year. And she decided like, ooh, I really like that color. That is bright. So she saved seeds from this plant and has continued to grow them. And after 3 or 5 years, it's now been successfully stabilized so that every time that she grows it, she gets all pink flowers. So, and this is from a home gardener. Both of these folks are sharing seeds from these varieties on the exchange. So if you're interested in Northern Adapted Bradford Watermelon or this beautiful Rosie's Pink Morning Glory, you can find those on the exchange. Any questions popping up? Feel free to let me know. So this next part and the last part I have of the presentation is a little bit of an introduction to saving your own seeds. And if some of you folks have been already doing that, I applaud you, and you probably will have, you know, lots of things that you can share with your own community or friends or family that are getting into this. And this will be kind of basic for folks that are going to be new to seed saving as well. All right, so here are kind of the 5 main tenets for what you should know to begin saving seeds. So choosing the right seeds. There are a few things you want to understand about your plants, know how to isolate your plants, harvesting, processing, and storing your seeds, and how to share your seeds. So first, what seeds can be saved? On the left-hand side, we have a picture of a Chioggia beet, which is an open pollinated seed. And then on the other side, we have a red ace, which is a hybrid seed. So all seed fall under these 2 categories, open pollinated or hybrid. A hybrid seed essentially had 2 different parents that were probably drastically different from each other. They were crossed, and then the seed those produced in the first generation is what is packaged up by the seed company and then sold to the public or to the farmer. The reason that these are difficult to save seed from is because it's not a stabilized variety. Since it was crossed just 1 generation ago, if you save seeds from the next generation, you're going to get a lot of diversity potentially in the plants that you grow out from those seeds that were saved. And then on the other side of the spectrum, open pollinated are seeds that have not been crossed. So every single generation that you plant is going to be true to type, meaning that it's going to produce the same beets essentially every year, as long as they're properly isolated. GMOs fall under the hybrid category. They're a specific type of hybrid. So you can save seed from any open pollinated variety. Hybrids, you'll get viable seed from them, and you can plant them and you can grow them, but it's not going to look like the picture that came off of the seed packet. All right, and where does heirloom fall into play here? For us, and there's a lot of different definitions around here, but for Seed Savers Exchange, an heirloom is simply a variety which has a history of being grown, saved, and shared by an individual family, a community, a culture. So it has that kind of history to it in the same way that an heirloom piece of jewelry is something that's passed down generation to generation to generation. So that's our definition of an heirloom. All right, so the first thing that I mentioned here was know your plant. I guess the second thing, the first one was know your seeds. So know your plants. Most plants typically fall, or vegetables anyways, that we're growing for seed fall under annual or biennial production. There are also perennials out there, but annuals are ones that produce seed in the very first year. Biennials are ones that it takes an additional year and usually a cold period before they'll actually produce seed. So if you're wondering why you've never actually seen seed from carrots, why your carrots don't flower, it's because they're a biennial. Some other things, a lot of root vegetables and cabbage, kale, or other brassicas like that are biennials. We also want to know whether or not your varieties are going to cross. Um, so on the right-hand side, we have a whole bunch of different kinds of squash. We maybe think about all these squash being fairly similar, but squash actually fall into 4 different unique species. And those individual species will not be able to cross with each other. So Cucurbita pepo is the species that we typically associate with zucchini, like a little round pie pumpkin. Um, those little round pie pumpkins and the zucchini, since they're both Cucurbita pepo, those would potentially cross if an insect visited flowers from both of those plants. And the next year, you'll get some kind of crazy looking pumpkin, zucchini, kind of mutant looking vegetables, which might be really fun, or it might not be what you wanted. Um, the next one there, Cucurbita moschata, is like our butternut squash. So if you grow a pie pumpkin and a butternut squash, doesn't matter how close those two are to each other, they're not going to cross because they're 2 different species. Same thing with beans, common bean, runner bean, lima beans, fava beans, cowpeas. Those are each different unique species, so they won't cross. Beans are also predominantly self-pollinating, so they don't even cross very often within the same species, but they might. So sometimes they do cross, and so that's just something to be observant about. Then this other picture, we have cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, and cauliflower in that image. Those are all the exact same species, Brassica oleracea. So even though Brussels sprouts look very different from cauliflower, if those are both producing seed or flowering at the same time, they could potentially cross if they're too close to each other. And if you save seeds from those, you're going to get some really crazy looking Brussels sprout cauliflower mutants, which might be fun or not what you want. So if you decide that you would like to grow a few different kinds of Cucurbita pepo squash, for example, they'll need to be isolated from each other. And there's multiple ways to do that. So examine your growing space and you can think about which one works best for you. In the middle picture, we have an example of an insect pollinated flower. You can typically recognize these pretty easy because they have like big, beautiful flowers. Those flowers are saying like, hey, I'm pretty and I'm beautiful, come pollinate me. The isolation distance there, 800 feet to half a mile, is generated based off how far bees and other insects will typically travel when they're out collecting pollen for the hive. So that's our recommendation for insect pollinated plants. Less distance than insect pollinated are our self-pollinated vegetables. So that's a picture of a soybean. The flowers are tiny. You can't see any of the reproductive parts, the stigma, or the anthers. And so those are self-pollinated. They don't cross as often. And so you can have more varieties closer together. And then the other side of the spectrum are wind-pollinated varieties. This is a picture of spinach, which might not be one that you think of when you think of wind pollination. But if your spinach is ever bolted, you'll notice that it kind of has 2 different looking flowers. This one is the pollen producing plant, and then it's actually a separate plant that receives the pollen. So those are wind pollinated. That pollen is really, really light, and on a gusty, windy day, it can travel up to a mile. So that's the isolation method for wind pollinated varieties. Also within that category, is corn. That's probably the other kind of really big one that people really enjoy growing in their gardens, and requires some creativity with isolation. So for isolation, you can isolate by distance. Easy to do for those selfers, more difficult to do for some of these other ones if you don't have, two separate gardens or a farm where you can isolate things a long way. So if you don't have that, what are some other options to isolate your plants in order to prevent crossing? So we have time is one model. What this image of the lettuce is representing is in the front. You can see that there is a red lettuce and a green lettuce that are just starting to bolt. Behind them, we have lettuce that have already flowered. So if you isolate by time, you're essentially going to stagger your plantings so that the different varieties are flowering at different times. And this works for short season crops that you maybe for eating, you might already kind of be staggering your plantings so that you can be eating radishes or lettuce or spinach kind of throughout the season. So you can also stagger your plantings for seed harvesting. And then we have containment. So in the front, there's some sunflowers where each individual flower is bagged. In the back, those are the isolation tents that we use here at Seed Savers Exchange. So that's kind of a really big model. But smaller containment structures are actually fairly easy to use by home gardeners. I've seen folks use this for tomatoes or peppers or eggplant with just like a little jewelry bag or like party favor bag and covering up the flower that they want to save seed from. And for something like tomatoes, you don't need to cover up every single flower on the entire plant. You can cover up a couple that you want to save seed from, and just remember not to eat those. And then the rest of them that you didn't cover up, you can eat. So those are options as well. Another kind of distance suggestion or idea is that if you have physical barriers in your garden of some kind, like a house and maybe two plots on opposite sides of your house, you could plant something with a barrier in between, and then hopefully the insects aren't going to be circumnavigating your whole house, or they'll visit other varieties or other kind of crop types before they get to the other tomato on the opposite side of your house. So there's a couple ideas. Know when to harvest. So seeds might be ready to harvest at the same time as the fruit or the vegetable that you're used to harvesting and eating, or they might mature later. So the tomatoes are ready at harvest. That also includes squash and peppers, melon, watermelon, beans, and eggplant and cucumbers. Those are a later maturity. So if you're typically harvesting peas, when they're green for the shelling stage, the dry pea stage is going to be later. And then same thing with eggplant and cucumbers. Those have a longer maturity for seed production. So you just need to allocate a few or a couple extra weeks in your garden if you're going to be saving a couple fruits to harvest seed from. And then I have two quick slides here about processing seeds. So there's kind of two kinds of seed processing, dry and wet. So dry, this includes beans, brassicas that dry completely on the plant, like kale or broccoli or carrots. So this is essentially threshing, which is removing the seed from the pod. And then within that process, you might have a lot of kind of chaff left over that's still mixed in with your seed. And so the winnowing process is blowing off some of that extra chaff so that what you're left with is just seed. Um, there's a lot of information out there about threshing and winnowing to kind of help you through these processes. We have videos on our YouTube page. And you can also, if you're working on something specific that you want information about, like basil, you can probably just go to YouTube and search for threshing basil or winnowing basil or something like that. And you'll probably find somebody out there who has done it and decided to be really helpful and share it with the rest of the internet community. And then wet seed processing, we have watermelons and tomatoes here. So there's a little bit of work to remove the seed from the flesh. Tomatoes actually go through kind of a little bit of a fermentation process, which helps break down that kind of gelatinous seed sac that's on the seed. And then rinsing and setting them out to dry. And like I said, a lot of information is available about this in books or online as well. And so you have your seeds harvested, went through all that work. You want to make sure that you can store your seeds, whether that's just storing them for a few months until the next growing season, or if you want to save them for longer. Maybe you're not going to grow that variety again for another 2 years because you have other varieties you want to grow. So packaging is important. You want something that's going to be kind of pest free. So this is an individual named Russell Crowe and his bean collection. And you can see that he's storing everything in glass jars, which is not going to have any bug issues. They're also at room temperature here. So our seed bank is like really for long term. So we are having it cold so that those seeds can last decades and decades and decades. If you don't need to save your seed that long, dry is actually more important than cold. So as long as your seeds have been properly dried so that they're not gonna mold when you put them in an airtight container, then most seeds will be perfectly happy for 3 to 5 years. That doesn't mean that after 3 to 5 years, your seeds are gonna be, dead. You won't get any germination. You'll probably just start to see a decrease in quality in your seed or the germination rate. So you can still try and grow your seeds out again in 6 years or 10 years, but you should maybe just plant some extra to compensate for lower germination. So that's essentially the nitty-gritty, really quick information for saving and storing seeds. Seed saving is really bountiful. A lot of times you're gonna harvest more than you need. So finding a way to share, whether that's, we have a seed library as one picture on the left, a seed swap, and then this right-hand picture, this is the print edition of the exchange, the yearbook that I mentioned. So lots of different places that you can share your seeds. And then here, I just mentioned a couple events that we have coming up. So these two are both going to be happening this summer, and they're both going to be virtual this year. Traditionally, they're in person, but we're going to do virtual for another year since we can reach so many more people that way. The conference and campout is an annual event that always happens. I wrote August here, but it's actually July. So my bad there. It's always the third weekend in July. And then virtual seed school is an event I plan, and that is 2 months, essentially one meeting a week, to learn all about seed saving. So what I just covered in 15 minutes about seed saving, we'll dive into and pull out over 7 weeks. So if you thought this was interesting, stay tuned. We have all of our events, and I don't know that it's actually up to date here. We do have conference and camp out on our website. We don't have Seed School up here yet, but it should be up by the end of the month. So watch out for those. And we hope you feel free to reach out with any questions, stay involved. I have my email address here, kgilbery@seedsavers.org, and our phone number. So feel free to reach out at any time as you have questions. And I'm happy to take questions from folks now as well. Thank you so much for listening, and happy that I got to share this information with you.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. This was wonderful. I actually have a question. I know that you save all the seeds there, but the stories that you told, just, I don't know, they have a piece of my heart now. And is there a journal of some sort that documents all these stories that have been shared as well as the seeds?
Yeah, so we have a database here where we're documenting this information. We actually have 3 seed historians, which we just hired. It was 1 seed historian for about the last 8 years, and just in 2020 we expanded it to 3 seed historians because we were like, we love these stories, we want to spend more time on documenting this. So right now, if you visit the catalog or the exchange and see varieties from Seed Savers Exchange, we always include a little bit of information about the stewardship history for those varieties. We're working on launching a new website that will have more of these stories available for folks to just search and look through. That's a couple years down the line, but in the meantime, you can follow us on social media, and we will kind of post stories sporadically as well. Yeah, they make you feel warm.
Yeah.
Like happy. You get to grow those varieties, and especially if it's named after a person, I feel like it's just such a instant connection that you can make to the generations and generations of humans that have been taking care of these seeds.
And I also need to get the Bradford watermelon seeds. I had to take a note for that. Does anyone have any questions for Kathryn? We do not have the book in our collection, but I will make sure that is available in the future.
Yeah, there's lots of different books too. Seed to Seed is another one. Okay. There's our books, we don't talk too much about flowers, but there's some seed saving or seed propagation flower books out there too that are really great. So you don't only have to use our resources. There's lots of good information out there.
But you know what you're doing, so we want to use your resources. This has been wonderful. I feel like I just, I'm not an avid gardener. I'm fairly new, but just listening to you talk and the history, I want to just do a deep dive now.
Yeah, do a little searching on like 1 or 2 of your favorite varieties and see what you can turn up about them. Where'd they come from? Who's grown them?
And I didn't think about, a variety of fruit or vegetable that was grown in like a warmer climate and then changing the location, how that would affect. I don't know why I didn't think that, but it's interesting and how it would take time.
Yeah, an interesting thing about, heirloom varieties is since it's something that was passed down among families, a lot of the time they are like very well adapted to their little microclimate. wherever the steward was taking care of them. And then you move them, and maybe they do really well. Maybe it just takes a couple of years of growing it before they kind of learn and understand your environment. But yeah, a lot of the times those have kind of unique adaptations that you might not see from a variety that was developed to be like universally appealing.
Thank you again. This was wonderful. This is great. Great way to spend your Tuesday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, you too. All right. Well, thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.